it's Sam. When Mercury goes retrograde, it's a time for us to reflect on our thinking process, on our thoughts, on the things we're telling ourselves in our head. Mercury is that voice, literally, that comes out of our mouth, which winds up being a sort of aggregate of our comprehension and understanding of something. You know, the reason Mercury is said to be the speaker is because he's actually, speech is the sort of aggregate of our comprehension. Like, you can tell how much someone really understands something by how well they can explain it, for example. And you can tell what someone thinks about themselves or about a given situation based on how they explain it, how well they understand things, and how well you understand something can be known by the words you say about it and whether or not you convey the truth. Now, when someone, let's say, in their natal chart has a powerful Mercury, they're good at speaking, but they're also good at listening, because good speech and good communication is a two-way sort of street. It's about speaking so that I can let you know what I want to say, and then it's also about listening and adjusting to what someone else says. And these are all great Mercury skills. And again, we can bring it down to the gross thing of being, when we speak and when we communicate, but it's actually, as I said, that's a kind of a sort of distilling of the process that is much deeper. And for instance, the deeper process of Mercury shows this whole way of adjusting to what life throws at you, and the story that you tell yourself about what things mean, and the way you communicate meaning to those things. Like, in Vedic astrology, Mercury is said to be the minister who is closest to the king, because, Mercury is closest to the sun, and he's the one who has the king's ear. And when the minister is good, like a good minister goes into all the different areas of the kingdom. He doesn't just go to the good places, which is where Jupiter goes. Jupiter's a counselor, but Jupiter doesn't go into the bar to find out what the people in the bar are saying, and he doesn't go into the, stable where they take care of the horses because, it's smelly, and he doesn't go into the brothel. He only goes to the good places, and Venus only goes to the fun places, and Saturn only goes to the safe places, and Mars only goes to the exciting places. Mercury goes to all the places. So Mercury is the part of the mind that's curious and wants to understand everything. Like a child who wants to know why, who doesn't really have a filter, who doesn't know, well, you shouldn't ask about that. Well, you say that to the Mercury part of you, and it just makes you want to know even more. Well, I shouldn't know about that? That makes me really want to know, right? That's what Mercury is. And it's how we gain understanding of things, by our direct experience, by our direct inquiry, by our curiosity to know, without judgment, without saying, well, this is something that's bad, so I better not, figure that thing out. No, Mercury says, how do I know if it's bad? I don't know anything about it. So I'm going to go and look at it. And I'm going to be open. I'm not going to have a judgment about it. I'm not going to have a bias. And you can see the flaws in people's thinking and the biases in people's thinking based on the Mercury, on the status of Mercury in their natal chart. Some people, for instance, let's say like a politician who's not a good politician, they can use words to really just manipulate and to just affirm their point of view. And you can see they're not really interested in actually conveying the truth, which good communication conveys the truth. It explains things in a subtle way. It explains the range of whatever, an issue is without these strong biases. A politician will frame a discussion toward their bias, and they will use words to manipulate and to coerce and to only talk about the things that prove their point of view. It's called propaganda, right? And intentionally omit things that would weaken their argument. It's good to win an argument, but winning arguments isn't actually really what Mercury is about. Mars is about winning arguments. Mercury is about the truth. And the truth is very subtle. The truth has a lot of paradox. And the ability and capacity to hold paradox meaning to see every point of view, is the true sign of intelligence. And so this is why Mercury shows the level of intelligence we have. And one of the biggest problems with the Mercury function, and one of the the real suffering of the Mercury part of us, is when we're not able to hold paradox, and instead we fall into just opinion to try to confirm our bias. Then we don't really grow, we don't expand mentally, and we don't really comprehend the world around us very well. And consequently, when we speak, we don't speak clearly, we don't really convey the truth, we don't convey multiple points of view, we wind up asserting our bias when we speak, we don't listen very well. So when Mercury goes retrograde, it's a time to reflect on this process, on this thinking process. And this reflection leads us to hopefully a greater awareness of where our thinking is not very accurate, where we're not listening very well to all points of view, where we're not willing to adjust our preconceived ideas about what's right and wrong in order to place a greater importance on the truth rather than on our opinions. This is very damaging to us and to those around us when we make mistakes, because, for instance, as I said, Mercury, as being the one that's closest to the sun and the one who has the king's ear, is the one telling the king what's really going on. And if he has a lot of these aversions and he doesn't want to go into these areas and he doesn't want to listen to this thing, and he's more based on judgment than he is on neutrality, which is a big Mercury keyword, then the king is not going to get a good report back. And so the real metaphor is Mercury is the story you're telling yourself about things. And when Mercury is powerful, you're telling yourself a good story. You're telling yourself a story that's pretty true, right? You're not judging yourself too harshly. You're not judging others too harshly. You're able to look at where you're making mistakes and where you need to change, and you're not so locked into defending your opinion that you can't look at yourself and your own mistakes, and you're also not focusing too much on your mistakes at the exclusion of to a point of paralysis where you just nitpick and criticize yourself to the point of insecurity as well. Again, that story in your head, that ability to have a sort of neutrality and the ability to look at things with discrimination and without a lot of judgment in the negative sense, is the power of Mercury. And Mercury is also at times the lack of judgment in the positive sense as well, what we have to be careful of. And this is also what happens with Mercury retrograde. You can realize as Mercury goes retrograde, we reflect on the process of what we're telling ourselves, what we're interested in. Maybe the things we're interested in are not really worthy. Maybe we're wasting our time. Maybe we're just sort of titillated and playing all the time and not getting serious. I have a lot of interaction with astrology students who just kind of want to sort of piddle around and play around and think that they're actually learning something. You don't learn something until you get a little more serious about it. So as an example, that's an example of a Mercury that's not really serving, it's not really taking someone higher, it's just kind of like eating, it's kind of like snacking. And we live very much in a kind of snacking culture, where we want to have a little snack. Oh, I'll have a little astrology snack. Oh, what's this, cute astrology personality that I like to listen to? What's he saying today? What's she saying today? Oh, that's cool. Wow. But it doesn't really, after a while, it's like, okay, you're not really going anywhere with it. Or, if it's not that, all kinds of things. I have my guilty pleasures too, where I like to watch this person, I like to watch this person on the news. So when Mercury goes retrograde, we can reflect on those things and reflect on our information gathering and how much we actually listen to people, not just speak, but how much we actually listen, how much we're really growing in intelligence and discrimination, how much we're benefiting from the story in our life and in our head. And again, when we're not taking things seriously and we're just kind of snacking all the time, kind of short attention span, you know, a powerful Mercury won't do too much of that. We'll do a little bit of it, but then we'll go, you know what, I need to get away from that and focus my intellect and my intelligence on something that's actually showing me the truth of life. And ultimately, Mercury brings discrimination, and discrimination is where we can delineate right from wrong, where we separate right from wrong. And I mean literally, well, I'm sorry, right from wrong is actually Jupiter. What I mean to say is where we separate truth from fiction, something that's true or not. True in the sense of being accurate. And again, true and false is different than right and wrong. Right and wrong are principles. True and false means, is this correct? Right? And ultimately we realize that every thought is an obstacle because we identify with the thought. And what's called jnana yoga is where we are behind the thoughts and we're observing the thoughts and we're not identified with it. We have detachment. So the closer we are to detachment from our mental process, the more powerful Mercury is, because we're not so engaged, we're not so emotionally connected, we're not so identified with our thinking process. And that comes from having detachment and from, you know, kind of stepping back from the speed of thought. You know, one of the last thing I'll say is, one thing about Mercury is that we have this illusion that we are a mind. Like, you have this illusion that you're this person and that you actually have a mind, that it's actually a solid thing. And it's not. It's just a lot of thoughts that happen very quickly. Underneath it all, there's actually not even any mind there. There's no thing called a mind. There's just a lot of thoughts that happen so fast, one after the next, and so many layers that it appears to be something formulated, and it's not. So what happens ultimately when you start to slow down the mind, when you go into deeper states of yoga and meditation, is the thoughts start to thin out. They start to slow down. Once you become present, I mean present to the truth and present to silence, that's what I mean by the truth, you realize you're not the thoughts, and the thoughts slow down. This is where mantra practice comes in, and this is why Mercury is great for mantras, because you replace the craziness of the mind and the constant speed of the mind and the unchecked nature of the mind running crazy with powerful vibration, usually focused on a deity or a guru. And instead of 10 million thoughts running 1,000 miles an hour, there's one powerful thought over and over again, and eventually, and that thought also pulls you inward towards silence. And as you go inward towards silence, you get a distance. There's a distance between the normal functioning buddhi, or mind that's always moving, and your true presence and your true consciousness. And then eventually the separation gets wider as you go deeper into the true self. Your association with yourself as the thoughts becomes less and less. Then the thoughts slow down, and you see that every thought is Maya, that no thought is you, that you are not any thought. That's jnana, or true discrimination, where every thought that arises that you want to grab onto, you say, no, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, not that, not that. It's called neti, 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 neti. Not that, not that, not that. Because we're constantly saying, I'm this thought, I'm that thought, I'm this thought, I'm that thought. So retrograde brings Mercury inside, internal, so that you can feel that process. Mantras are very good when Mercury's retrograde, and it's a time to really reflect on things that you say. Rather than speaking so much, you can listen more. Retrograde is about listening. Forward is about talking. We're usually talking. Now's a good time to listen, to reflect, and to notice your process around these things that I'm describing. And of course, usually Mercury retrograde, you hear all this stuff about technology messing up and whatnot. There could be those kinds of things because your lack of attention to detail and technology, especially in this world where you have a lot of technology that we're sort of depending on. So your reliance on those things and your capacity to stay on top of it is shown by Mercury. Whether you're overwhelmed by all the details and the technology or whether you are present to it. So you may find those things show up as a sort of corrective experience on some level. So be aware of that potential as well and look more deeply into it than that. That's why I don't really like to focus on that part of it too much because, things back up and things mess up a little bit. Look for the miscommunications, You'll see these things come back to roost when Mercury goes retrograde. When he goes retrograde, we, things that we didn't communicate very well come back to us. And this gives us the capacity and the necessity to then reflect and say, oh yeah, okay. This is where I misspoke, or I wasn't clear about this. I wasn't, flexible enough. So it's always an interesting time. The Mercury retrogrades, there are usually 3 per year, and it's a time to really get clear about the voice in your head, what it's telling you, and probably your need to have more detachment from the mental process and the thought process itself, and as it relates to the people in your life, to be less, the people in your life and your strong opinions, to be less opinionated and judgmental about what you think, and to be more accommodating, and to notice the way you use language. Do you use language to get what you want or to convey the truth? They're often not the same, because we tend to know what's right, but if we think doing what's right is going to deprive me of getting what I want, they're not always the same thing. Especially once we get in relationships and stuff, we can use language to manipulate someone. It happens a lot. And once we feel like we're being manipulated by someone, that they're not really being honest with us and telling us the truth, instead they're telling us what they think they need to say in order to get what they want from us, and they're, using language and their communication to actually manipulate us to get what they want rather than be honest, we resent it. And we all do it. So now's the time to really correct those things anytime Mercury goes retrograde.